For over a century, the U.S. banking system has operated on a foundation that appeared stable on the surface. But beneath the polished marble floors and complex financial jargon, something has been quietly unraveling. While the average person goes about their day unaware, a structural collapse is unfolding behind the scenes. And by the time most people realize what's happening, it may already be too late to react. Let's start with the obvious. Bank failures are no longer rare. In fact, we've seen more regional banks quietly absorbed, bailed out, or merged in the past 24 months than in any time since the 2008 crisis. But this time, it's different. Because this time, the instability isn't just on the surface, it's built into the system itself. Today, the U.S. national debt has surpassed $36 trillion. That number alone is mind-bending, but it's the implications that really matter. The more debt the government issues, the more it relies on banks to buy that debt. These banks, in turn, are loaded up with long-duration treasury bonds, many of which are now deeply underwater as interest rates have surged. That's not just a paper loss, it's a ticking time bomb. As interest rates rise, the value of those older, low-yield bonds drops. Banks are being forced to either hold on to losing positions or realize massive losses. Silicon Valley Bank was the first domino to fall in this new era, but it won't be the last. The cracks that started with regional banks are now creeping toward the core of the system. And the Fed? They know it. That's why they've quietly implemented emergency liquidity facilities like the BTFP, Bank Term Funding Program. But here's the problem. These are temporary patches for a structural fracture. They're not solving the real issue. They're buying time, but time may not be on our side. Here's where things get really dangerous. As more banks are put under pressure, consolidation becomes a trend. Fewer banks means more centralized power and less competition. In the past 40 years, the number of U.S. banks has fallen from over 14,000 to just under 4,000, and that number continues to shrink each year. You might not feel the effects yet. Your debit card still works, your mobile banking app still loads. But behind the curtain, liquidity is thinning. Confidence is eroding, and foreign buyers of U.S. debt are stepping back. China and Japan, historically two of the largest foreign holders of U.S. treasuries, have been steadily reducing their exposure. This leaves the Federal Reserve and domestic banks to pick up the slack. But the problem is they're running out of capacity to do so without triggering inflation or further instability. All of this creates a vicious loop. The government needs to borrow more. Banks are less able to absorb that debt. The Fed tries to fill the gap, which undermines the dollar. And trust in the entire system begins to waver. Here's the part no one's talking about. Most Americans don't realize that their deposits aren't actually in the bank, at least not in the way they think. When you deposit money into a bank, you're technically lending it to them. They turn around and invest or lend it elsewhere. What you have is a claim, not a vault full of cash with your name on it. And that works fine until it doesn't. During times of panic, like what we saw with Signature Bank, First Republic, and others, those claims get tested. If too many people ask for their money at once, the system buckles. That's not a hypothetical. That's historical fact. So why isn't this being shouted from the rooftops? Because the illusion of stability is more important to those in power than actually fixing the system. Confidence is everything in banking. Once that cracks, the dominoes fall fast. Meanwhile, the ultra-wealthy have already begun moving their capital into alternatives. Gold has soared above $3,360 an ounce. Silver is climbing. Tokenized assets, decentralized storage, and hard commodities are quietly being accumulated. And this isn't just fear-based speculation. It's a reaction to something that can no longer be ignored. The U.S. banking system is no longer functioning as intended. Here's what you're not supposed to know. New financial technologies are rising to challenge the old guard. Decentralized networks like XRP and Stellar are creating real-time settlement systems that make the current banking structure look like a relic. Instead of waiting 3 to 5 days for a wire transfer, value can now be sent across the world in seconds for fractions of a penny. These networks don't require trust in a centralized institution. They're programmed, transparent, and mathematically verifiable. And in a world where banks are failing, trust is everything. We're entering an era where the financial system itself will be forced to evolve or collapse. So what does that mean for you? It means understanding what's coming before it fully arrives. It means being proactive instead of reactive. And it means protecting yourself from a slow-motion collapse that is already underway. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing to Wealth Signal. We break down the financial changes that matter most before they reach the headlines. By subscribing, you're joining a growing community of people who see what's coming and want to stay informed, empowered, and ahead of the curve. But here's where it gets even more alarming. The traditional banking system was never designed for resilience in the digital age. Most of the current infrastructure relies on batch processing and outdated settlement protocols, which means that when a crisis does hit, the system doesn't bend, it breaks. And while banks try to maintain a public image of strength, their real balance sheets often tell a different story. Hidden liabilities, undercapitalized reserves, and leveraged bets on volatile instruments have become the norm, not the exception. And with the Fed continuing to pump artificial liquidity into the system, all it's doing is inflating a balloon that's already straining at the seams. Let's not forget about the growing distrust. According to recent Gallup polls, public confidence in traditional banks has hit record lows. Millions of Americans no longer believe the system works in their favor. Instead, they're looking for alternatives, decentralized systems, self-custody solutions, and digital assets that don't rely on third-party intermediaries. This isn't speculation. It's a trend. Behind the scenes, major institutions are preparing for a fundamental shift. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Fidelity have quietly ramped up their blockchain research divisions. Central banks around the world are racing to implement their own digital currencies, not because they believe in innovation, but because they fear obsolescence. The United States has now surpassed $36 trillion in national debt. This isn't just an accounting problem, it's a ticking time bomb. As interest payments alone consume more and more of the federal budget, the government's ability to backstop failing banks becomes increasingly questionable. If just one major institution were to go under in today's environment, it could trigger a contagion unlike anything we've seen before. And yet, despite all of this, the mainstream narrative remains eerily calm. Bank commercials still promise safety, reliability, and legacy. But these are promises built on a crumbling foundation. The reality is, our financial system is being propped up by blind faith and short-term fixes, and both are starting to run out. What's coming isn't a sudden crash. It's a slow-motion unraveling. One by one, the pillars that supported the old system are being removed by innovation, by distrust, and by the weight of their own unsustainable practices. If you've been watching carefully, you'll notice something else. This collapse is also a transfer. A transfer of wealth, power, and influence from centralized institutions to decentralized technologies. Blockchain, tokenized assets, distributed consensus. These aren't just buzzwords, they are the new architecture of money. And those who see it now, who understand what's happening before it becomes obvious, are positioning themselves not just to survive, but to thrive. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing to Wealth Signal. This channel is your signal in the noise, cutting through the media fog and revealing the truths about money, control, and the future of wealth. If you're serious about protecting and growing your financial freedom during one of the most pivotal transitions in modern history, subscribing is the first step. Don't get caught off guard. Stay informed. Stay ahead. We'll see you in the next one.